Let's talk about short-term rentals.
Let's do it. This is a fun one.
Hot topic with DSCR appraisers and lenders and you and I have had a couple conversations
We talked about it.
regarding how are appraisers finding these comparable comps? How are they determining what the short-term market rents are going to be? I know that short-term rental data is not really public information. So if you
Mhm.
can walk me through that process and has anything changed? Because we talked about how the 1007 Fannie Mae market rent analysis form, which we use right now for long-term rentals or short-term rentals, was built for long-term rentals. So
Yeah.
you mentioned, a new appraisal form coming out. I'd like to hear a little more about that after this. But have they come up with anything to in regards to the 1007 and short-term rentals and market rents?
Yeah, I'll tell you what my experience, and it's probably limited, right? Because it is a new and ever evolving topic. And I want to hear real quick. So from your experience, what have you seen on the appraisals that for short-term rentals? What are you seeing? What's been your experience so we can kind of set the stage a little bit from the appraisals you're getting? What are you seeing appraisers doing?
Oh gosh, I've had a lot of problems. So I have certain AMCs that have difficulty getting appraisers to do short-term rentals. And then I have other AMCs that say they could do them. But then when they reach out, they're having problems also. They tell me that it's the area and certain appraisers are getting fined and slapped, on their for their license are getting fined and so they're afraid to do short-term rentals. There's a lot of appraisers out there who flat out say they won't even appraise a short-term rental.
Right. And currently I fall in that category, and I'll tell you why. It doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that for me right now, there's so much changing regulation. It's not cut and dry. It's not clear. And with appraisers, right, your livelihood is based on your license. And so anything that jeopardizes your license for me is a concern, right? For other appraisers, they don't, if they're like, hey, I don't think it's that big a deal. I can handle it. I feel like I can, produce credible results. I know appraisers that do short-term rental analysis. And the way that they do that is they usually get, an average occupancy, an average nightly rate, kind of work those things together, produce an analysis. The other great debate is whether a residential appraiser or a commercial appraiser should be doing that report. Most residential appraisers, the majority of your assignments are going to be based on you're going to be doing the sales comparison approach. You can do the cost approach, you can do the income approach, but the most of your value is going to be based on finding similar sales, making adjustments, determining what the market would pay, right? When you get in the commercial realm, uh, you are way more involved in the cash flow world, right? You're involved in what is the rents, what are the leases in this commercial property, what is that worth? It's a 10-year lease, it's a triple net. You're getting into that world. And so there's a school of thought that think, hey, yeah, if we're going to be doing short-term rental analysis, it really needs to be done by a commercial general who has specific expertise and training in actually understanding those type of things and can do a competent job. Because really, to follow USPAP, there's a rule in there called the competency rule. And that's another reason why I have chosen at this point in my career, until I gain more competency, where I'm like, yeah, I know how to do this the right way. According to USPAP, you should not accept an assignment that you're not competent to do unless you disclose to the client, hey, I'm not competent in this. However, I have resources. I have these other appraisers who do these regularly, or I have this way to become competent in that assignment. Once you then become competent, you can accept those type of assignments and move forward. So in the short-term rental, there's just so much back and forth, and some governing bodies are saying appraisers are way inflating and overvaluing these short-term rentals, and we're underwriting these loans that are then gonna, if a foreclosure happens, we lent way more money, or if the government, the city says in this city specifically, they're like, hey, you can't do short-term rental anymore. Well, guess what? They just loaned a big loan on a house that now it got shut down. However, there's areas like where I was trained in St. George, Utah, where a long time ago they immediately saw the trend of it's always been a pretty big destination area. It's near Zion's National Park. Zion's National Park has, I don't remember if it's 7 or 8 million people that come every year, just that park. And St. George is a big place, a little over 100,000 people. And so they saw this trend coming, and they have designated zones that were the only use in those areas is short-term nightly rental, single family. People don't live there. It's the only purposes for that. And so Um, in situations like that, where it's like, it's going to be there moving forward, it's not as risky, if you will, in my opinion, to do some type of analysis like that. Back to the 1007, 1007 really isn't the place to do a short-term rental. That should only be, it's meant for the long term. So appraisers that are doing short-term rentals that I know, they're doing it more narrative format, and just explaining where and how they are coming up with the data or their estimated rents. So it's a hot topic. I just wish that like Fannie and somebody would come out, the AQB, because that's the Appraisal Qualifications Board. I wish somebody would come out and say, hey, look, appraisers, you can do short-term rentals. If you're a certified residential guy, you are qualified. Take this course. This is how we as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, this is how we want it handled, right? And I guess Fannie and Freddie aren't even necessarily the best examples because a lot of these aren't going to be so. I mean, tell me your experience. DSCR, is everybody being sold to the GSC, the government sponsored enterprises? No, there's lots of different people who are buying up those loans, whether they're being packaged and sold on the stock market or, there's lots of different places those are going. So someone somewhere needs to come together and just say, yes, this has been around for long enough. This is how we need it handled. And if an appraiser follows these guidelines, they're not going to jeopardize their license, right? And we feel comfortable doing that. But up to this point, that has not happened yet. And so you get a real mixed bag of opinions and some very strong. I had a review appraiser for a client who had reached out, hey, we want you to do a short term rental. And I called up the review appraiser who's ultimately going to basically critique my work. And he's like, you should not be doing short term rentals. And he was adamant. And then I told the lender, hey, your review appraiser that you pay told me not to do this. And then there was a whole debacle and
Mhm.
it wasn't very
Yeah.
fun. But I hope that there's some new information coming down the pipeline because I think that appraisers are competent, capable of doing it. Yes, right. It's all in the same ballpark. It's all in the same realm. But getting a little more clarity on the process that can also keep the lender safe and the appraiser safe. So down the road, the appraiser's not being come after because, like I said, city laws changed, rental, the algorithm in Airbnb changed, and people are losing their shorts, and it comes back on the appraiser, and the appraiser gets hosed at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So
I hope some regulation comes in place for that because it is definitely a hot topic right now.
just
Lenders
some
won't.
clarity. Yeah, just
Yeah.
some clarity. Somebody to come down. I don't even know who, but somebody higher up who has like some control who can come down and just say, these are fine to do. Like you can do these. This is how we do it in an acceptable way. And if you do it in this way, you're going to be protected, right? If things change, like the government, that city doesn't do Airbnb, like that's not on you. You couldn't predict that. Or maybe they're like, we don't allow it unless a city has implicitly said, we're going to allow this in this area. I don't know what that needs to be, but something to just help regulate it and just get a little bit more protection for both parties, if that makes sense. Because those loans are happening and they're trying to get done, and there's a big market for it. So I think that it
Mhm.
should be able to be done, but just there needs to be something sooner rather. I don't know what's taking so long because this is not a new issue at all.
Right. No, it's not. And my lenders will not accept the comparables on a narrative, and they won't accept the market rent on a narrative. They
Mm.
they won't. So there's definitely some
So they
friction
make you
there.
they so they make you do it on a 1007. And what the appraisers are told is if you do it on a 1007, you are producing a misleading report because the 1007 is for long-term rents. And so it's a whole thing. I wish I had better information on that.
I know you'll be reaching out to me if you ever hear any changes on that.
Oh,
And
a hundred percent. I'm eager for some changes to happen because I'm happy to, provide that service if I felt like I could do it in a way that wasn't like I said, misleading, because that's really what it comes down to as an appraiser. You can make mistakes, that happens, but as long as you're not misleading or intentionally fraudulent, that when you produce misleading results, that's when you get yourself in trouble. That's when license gets suspended, etc.
begin where they're even finding that data since it's not public data.
Yeah, the only place like for appraisers that have done it or are doing it, they're going to places like AirDNA. They're going to some of those private sites. They're having to pay for that information, and once again, it's projected, right? I've also seen where they use a track record, like the past 3 years of rental history, but there's not a public. It's not like public data for sales and what we do. Everything else in our industry, you got to go to private sources to figure that information out.
Typically, are appraisers charging more to do a short-term rental appraisal in your, do you know?
Yeah, typically, yes. Just because once again, it's a bigger headache, there's more risk, and there's more, it takes a lot more time because there's a lot more explanation that
Mhm.
in a typical, like you do a typical 1007 for long-term rents, pretty straightforward. Here's the rent, here's the long-term rentals, here's the long-term rent, very brief explanation on what's going on in the rental market, et cetera. You're done. Versus, hey, here's all the ways I've done to try to determine the most likely amount of rent this will, produce this year. And so they usually will charge more.
Okay, some great information.